This is TWiT.
I am talking to Gretchen Bakke. She is the author of The Grid, The Fraying Wires Between Americans and Our Energy Future. There's just a lot of great stories. I'm sure you've told this story before, but there was a blackout that was caused by one of the most mundane reasons in 2003. Can you tell a little bit about that story with the trees that involved this huge blackout?
Yeah, did you read there's a footnote, a secret little hidden footnote about that story too. It's the 2003 East Coast blackout, which was massive. It was massive. I can never remember the number of people that were actually blacked out, but it was all of the East Coast for a day and a half, I think. And it was caused by three overgrown trees, and a computer bug in Ohio. So I don't even know what else to say about it, but it could become so. It becomes in some ways so the details of it become so mundane, which is that the greatest threat to our grid today, despite all of its worries about terrorism and all of the worries about how unthinking individuals are actually intervening in the workings of the system, the greatest threat is actually foliage. And so you should look at trees with this sense of horror. I look out my window and I see a tree basically wrapped around an electrical feeder that's coming into my house. Right? I can't get up there, cut it, the branches down. So that's everywhere. That's the world of the grid, is that there's just a lot of trees in America and they grow. And a lot of them are on private property and a lot of them are on city property, and cities don't necessarily have the money to keep up good tree trimming schedules. Utilities find ways to spare money by limiting or making optional tree trimming schedules. So they'll go from trimming every 3 years to trimming every 5 years. And even if they don't meet that, there's no oversight on that, or having a crew with 3 people to having a crew with 2 people. And in this way, they can kind of balance their budget. The utilities are having a lot of trouble fiscally right now, so they are trying to find ways to just stay afloat. And tree trimming budgets is a good way to do that. But what that means is that I think PG&E actually made a clearance. They made their clearance 1 inch, something like that. So you have a tree that's 1 inch from a power line. If that line, on a hot day, lines sag, metal just does this, it just sags down when it's hot out. And so that 1 inch means nothing. A line is going to touch that tree, or a line is going to be close enough to that tree to touch that tree, for the electricity to jump, to arc, it's called, over to the tree. And that's what happened. That's what started the 2003 blackout, was a tree which was a little bit too tall. It's not clear. We don't have a count on the actual height of the tree, because when the federal investigators went back to find the tree, it had been cut down and all of the wood had been stacked up. It was missing the very top piece. So they and the utility said that someone must have just taken it home for firewood. So nobody knows how tall the tree was. And for this reason, there have been no criminal charges against the utility, because there's no proof that they, in fact, let the tree get too tall. But what was left of the tree was already really, really tall, probably taller than it should have been, right? And we know that particular utility had been cutting its tree trimming schedule. They had actually moved it from a 3-year to a 5-year. So whatever, the trees are growing. It's a problem. So that tree touched, and when a tree touches a wire, one of the things that happens is it will short the wire out, or the wire will arc, which means it just shoots lightning. Essentially, instead of following the wire, the electricity goes wild, and it just turns into lightning, and it just shoots out and hits whatever is nearest, exactly like lightning does. And it's usually the nearest thing is the tree, but it can be the roof of somebody's house, or something else. And yeah, of course, what's funny about that story is that there's a kid who's at home, a teenager who's at home under that first tree, and he's 18, but he's sitting at home, and he hears this giant bang, and then all of his outlets start to smoke. So they had to buy some new appliances, those people, after that. And then, so that happens. And then there's there are 2 more trees. It was quite a hot August day. So the wires were sagging down. That's part of the problem. So there were 2 more trees that shorted out. And at that point, the electricity that's moving through the system, so electricity is always going to where it's needed. It's, one of the natures of electricity is that where it sees sort of this call of least resistance, it will go in that direction. It's called a sink. So there isn't somebody that has to program the grid when you turn on your light to say, like, electricity, come over here. Electricity notices that there's a pathway open to it, and it moves there. And it doesn't take the shortest route because it travels at sort of roughly the speed of light. It just takes all the routes. So to make an electric grid work, you just need a lot of routes available to the electricity. But when you start to take down wires, these duplicate routes, there's only so many duplicate wires in place. So they start to come down, and the electricity still wants to go where it was going, where it's needed, where there's it's like your light that's turned on is calling out to electricity over here, and electricity is going in that direction. But it can't get there. And so it starts overloading the smaller wires, it starts overloading wires. And those wires then click off automatically. They have this fuse box thing that I was talking about before. So they're not dying. They're just self-protectively shutting down. Then the electricity has no way to get to where it's going. So all of this is happening, and it's the beginnings of a blackout. That's what you could call the beginnings of a blackout. And meanwhile, in the control room, there's a computer bug that is making it so that the alarms, neither the on-screen alarms nor the auditory alarms, are going off. They'd had a computer upgrade at midnight the night before. Nobody knew that this had happened. So the guys in the computer room there's nothing to tell them that the system isn't working the way that it should be, except people start to call on the phone.
Say there's smoke coming out of my outlets.
There's smoke coming out of my outlet. But even like people one utility over, it's just like there's something really wrong, right? And in the control room, and it's called First Energy in Ohio, they're like, no, we don't see anything. Everything's fine. After like the 10th one of these phone calls, they start to be like, oh, something is not fine. They start to figure out that there's a problem. And thanks to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, by the way, a shout out to them, because they did all this research. I just read through their archives they have records of these telephone conversations, which are absolutely hysterical. Hysterical in retrospect, not for the people who were in them, but in retrospect. And they did all of this work reporting on the ways in which the various parts of this blackout kind of complemented each other to produce what effectively happened. And the blackout spread because Ohio, because the electricity was doing this, instead of going to where it was being called, it was trying to go and couldn't go. Ohio looked to the East Coast like a giant sink. It looked like there wasn't enough electricity in Ohio. So because the grid is interconnected, all of this electricity came flooding out of the East Coast into Ohio, which was a system that didn't have enough lines to even deal with the electricity that was there. So it comes flooding into Ohio, and suddenly it bounces back. There isn't a sink in Ohio. There's too much electricity in Ohio. It bounces back over. So the East Coast, New York State, the first thing they see is like this massive pull of electricity out of their system, and then this wave crashing of electricity, and it's going to destroy everything, right? It's going to burn out everything. It's going to start destroying power plants. It's coming in. Just in a way that it cannot be controlled. So they just shut everything down. They shut down the lines that connect them to Ohio. So that's how you get the blackout in New York. It was actually self-protective. It was like everybody needs to stay away from Ohio. So when people say a cascading blackout, is that there's a little thing that turns into another thing, that turns into another thing, that turns into another thing.